Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast. And today we have a guest who's been on the show before, but not on the video version. Here we have, he's an author, he's an actor, he's a commentator, he hosts his own podcast, which you'll have to refresh me of the names because you've changed around a little bit. So here he is, Phil Hall. How are you?
Okay, Mark, thank you for having me on the show, or
Mhm.
having me back on the show. I've been on
Back
the
on the
show
show, yes.
some years ago with one of my earlier books.
Yes, it was about the Bigfoot book, which we might mention a little bit later. But so tell me a little bit about yourself and all the different things I mentioned. You can mention your podcast, you can mention some acting roles, and what the current book we're going to be talking about, and we'll take it from there. And I have a bunch of questions about it, so go ahead.
Well, I am Phil Hall, and as you've said, I am a writer and have been for many, many years. I'm the author of 10 books, a new book which is coming out on June 7 called Jesus Christ Movie Star, which details how movies have depicted Jesus from the 1890s, the beginning as a silent movie, to today's digital cinema. I have also written books including In Search of Lost Films, The Greatest Bad Movies of All Time, The History of Independent Cinema, The Weirdest Movie Ever Made, about the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot film, which you also alluded to. I also last year wrote my first play. It was a radio play based on Moby Dick. It was actually performed by the Nutmeg Junction Radio Theater, and I played Captain Ahab. You can find the broadcast online, and the play itself is sold as an ebook from Bear Manor Media, which is my publisher. Uh, I am the host of the Online Movie Show, which is a weekly podcast heard on SoundCloud. In fact, you've been a guest on the show a few times, and these are among my favorite episodes. And I'm also the co-host of a weekly radio talk show called Nutmeg Chatter, which is syndicated on 6 stations in Connecticut and heard online at nutmegchatter.com. And you've also been on 2 of those shows too.
Oh, I didn't
So
know that.
a lot of cross-pollination going on between us.
Yes, and I think that's why I didn't know which podcast, because I knew there's some newer ones and name changes and stuff. Online Movie Show, I do remember. It's just the other titles I did not.
No,
Uh,
and as you mentioned, I'm also a movie actor. I've not done movies in a while. I've been focusing on writing and broadcasting, but I've done about 25 films. I've also appeared in several documentaries as myself, strangely enough. So, but I've also been a movie critic going back to the late 1980s. When I was in college, I was writing for the New York Daily News. For many years, I was writing for Film Threat and for Wired Magazine. And now I have a weekly column on Cinema Crazed called The Bootleg Files, which focuses on films and TV productions that you can only find in unauthorized duplications, either posted on YouTube without copyright permission or sold on bootleg DVDs. And I've been doing that since about, I think, 2003. And so it's been going on for quite some time.
Quick question about that. I mean, I'm sure there has, but I mean, has any of your columns sparked a release of anything? So now
Yes.
there's a legitimate release because, hey, this might be worth releasing now that Phil's talked about it.
Yes, there was a movie some years ago called The Noah. It was an avant-garde film by Daniel Burla. It was shot in Puerto Rico, starring Robert Strauss. You might remember him from Stalag 17.
Yeah.
And because of that column, Pathfinder Pictures was able to track down the original negative and restored the film and put it out on DVD. So that's the one film that my column has been able to unleash. But there have been other films that I've written about over the years that eventually wound up in commercial release, including The High and the Mighty, Anna Lucasta, Morning Becomes Electra, and Let It Be, which actually was one of the first columns going way back. That's supposed to be coming out, but it's been delayed so many times. I don't know if it ever will, but I'll wait and see.
Yeah. Well, the latest is it was supposed to come out in 2020, but because of COVID and everything, delayed till probably this fall 2021. I mean, at least they did a sneak preview of it on, I've seen it on Disney Plus and YouTube of, the like a 5-minute footage reel. So it looks like it should legitimately come out this time. So
Is it going to be on Disney Plus? I don't know what the
Well, I
release
mean,
is going to be.
the ad for it is, it's like a 5-minute promotional for it, and it shows so any subscriber can go on it now, or if you don't want to, go on YouTube, and it's just a 5-minute piece that just shows various footage. I think there's a couple just general interviews just saying, hey, this is coming out and blah 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 blah, but they didn't give an official release date still. But I think it was supposed to be fall of 2020 originally, so I expected in the fall. Gotta get those Christmas sales, even if the original movie came out in May of 1970s, so whatever. Anyway, enough of those gods. Let's talk about Jesus Christ movie star. When you first told me about this, I was like, that's the best title ever. So let me ask you this first, and I don't even have this written down. Did you come up with the title first, or did you start writing and then come up with the title?
Oh, the title came later.
Okay.
It seemed like the only possible title, and it's really not an original title. I have Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice to thank for that. But no, I've usually have the titles come after the books begin, and that's where the weirdest movie ever made, the Bigfoot book. I started writing it without a title because I didn't know what to call it. It wasn't until it was finished that I decided to call it the weirdest movie ever made because, in my opinion, it was the weirdest movie ever made. So.
Yes. Weirder than the movies in this book.
Oh yeah, that's another book and another episode. But no, at first I was concerned that it might be seen as either being flippant, or it might just be seen as, oh, he's ripping off Jesus Christ Superstar. But so far, I've not gotten any negative comments on the title of the book.
Yeah. I thought it was very clever and brilliant, and there is a bit you do talk about Monty Python's Life of Brian, and that's why I asked this, because such movies come from just flippant comments. Is that, and you talk about it in the book, that Eric Idle said, somebody asked him, "What's your next movie?" And he just said at the end of Holy Grail at a press conference, "Jesus Christ, lust for glory," you know.
Yeah.
And, then after they thought about it, they go, maybe we could make a movie. And of course, it got retooled as a movie about Brian, not Jesus, but Jesus does make a couple token appearances, and so it's worthy of a mention in your book, at least that. So my main question is, how did you arrive at your selections? I mean, you gave me a copy of the book, so I kind of paraphrased through it. It's like, it's a pretty quick read. It's only about 150 pages, so it's not like it takes forever like my books that are like 700 or something. And you kind of qualify in the intro what you included and what you didn't, but how did you arrive at your selections for the book?
Well, the reason the book is, I think it's close to 160 or 170. I don't remember the exact number, but I decided, well, I couldn't write about every single Jesus movie because there are too many of them. In fact, I'd have about 10 or 12 books if I was to do every single film, including television films, educational films, direct to video films, even a couple of VR films too for the virtual reality crowd, which I found fascinating.
Wow.
So I decided I would only focus on theatrical releases. There's one exception in there, which we can discuss later, because of historic importance, but theatrical releases about the adult Jesus. So I don't have films related to the Nativity. There are several wonderful films about that, but that's not really where I was looking for, because everybody is like, oh, what a cute baby. And it's like, oh, that's not.
And then you have a slew of Rankin Bass specials or whatever.
Oh, yes. No, there actually, there's, I think, one animated film in the book. It was a puppet film that came out in 2000. But otherwise, there were live action films. And I wanted to try to get as many, if not all of the films that meet my parameters. And the research was extensive and exhaustive. In fact, when the book was ready to go, I was still finding stuff that I wasn't aware of. And it's like, oh, stop the press, stop the press. It's like, what? It's like, yeah, stop the press. I have to put this in. And so I believe it's the most comprehensive book on theatrical releases of Jesus-centric cinema, starting from the 1890s, as I mentioned, which surprised me in doing the research because I didn't realize there were so many films about Jesus that were made in the 1890s. And the reason I wasn't aware of them is because they don't exist anymore. Most of them have long since disappeared. And for whatever reason, a lot of film history books on the silent era don't mention these
Hmm.
films. If they do, they'll start with From the Manger to the Cross, which is 1912. But there were a slew of films prior to that. And it was an eye opener for me to discover these films. And I hope for the people who read the book, they'll be inspired too, because this is an aspect of film history that I genuinely was not aware of until I started doing the research. I freely admit that. Film historians, I guess historians in general, always like to go around saying, I know everything. Well, I thought I did, but I was wrong. And I was, and I saw the research as being a wonderful learning experience. And I really hope that the book is for the reader a wonderful learning experience because it's just fascinating how much has been made over the years. There are the famous films, but there are also intriguing and somewhat bizarre obscurities that I've been able to unearth over the course of my research.
Hmm. Now, you said that you obviously don't have access because the films literally don't exist anymore. So, without revealing all your secrets, how did you find out about them if they're not really around to look at?
I was digging through books that I was not familiar with and going through research papers online, and there would be brief mentions of these films. And so I started to try to do more research. I had a clue to start with and kept searching and searching. Uh, I actually, in a way, prefer researching to writing because it's like archaeology. You're digging and digging until you find something. And I was digging through so much material, and sometimes just by accident, I would find things that I wasn't aware of. For example, one of the stop the press moments came, I found something on a website about Philippine movie making,
Mm,
and there was a 1972 Philippine film called Jesus Christ Superstar, but it was not the
mhm,
Broadway musical.
yeah.
It was a musical, but they created a new score with a Philippine cast, and I saw that they have a poster for it online, but I've not seen any pictures of it, and I have no idea where to find the print. I assume it was not released outside of the Philippines, and that country has a rather dismal history of preservation. So I'm hoping that the film is still extant somewhere over there, though there's a good possibility it's not.
Mm, okay. So on films like that, I mean, what do you do? I mean, is there enough to write about? I mean, I guess, obviously the life of Jesus is the
Yeah,
basis for Jesus Christ Superstar, and you can kind of fill in the dots, but did you know that that's what the Philippine movie is about? Was it taking the same story as the Andrew Lloyd Webber film, which actually was a soundtrack album originally, or just a album story, originally? So,
I believe it was just a Philippine ripoff of the
okay.
Lloyd Webber Rice musical. So uh, from what I could see of the poster, it was also a modern dress version as opposed to the sort of disco Judean clothing that they had in the Norman Jewison film.
Right. Mhm. And then, the obvious thing, is like, how did you arrive at yourself? What caused a film you kind of touched on this at the beginning, but what caused a film to be eliminated from your list? I mean, was it purely that like some of these ones that came from 1890, were those just general release, however they
Yes,
released films back in 1890?
yes, they were. They were general
Okay,
release. They
okay.
were well, there was no home entertainment, so
Right.
these were all public exhibition films. So it fit into the parameter that I'd be focusing on a theatrical release about the life of the adult Jesus. So that's how they got in there.
Okay, so the ones that would be eliminated are just ones not designated for a mainstream audience per se, or
Mhm.
not viewed. I mean, you went over a few of them, but I mean, it's like, where's the fine line? I guess, like if you see a documentary,
Mhm.
does that count if it was a wide release or no?
Well, yes, if it was a theatrical release, it would.
Okay,
If it was done for the educational market or for television or direct to video, it wouldn't.
okay,
There have been relatively few documentaries on Jesus that went into theatrical release. I think the most famous one is In Search of Historic Jesus from Sun Classics in 1980. And if you're old enough to remember the Sun Classics movies when they came out, they were a lot of fun for the wrong reasons. But
Yes.
that was one of them.
Okay. Yeah, and I wasn't even thinking about that one, but yeah, the one that came to mind, which isn't a Jesus film, but just a biblical film, is in the mid '70s. There's In Search of Noah's Ark, which got a pretty wide release, and I think
Well,
did
that's the Old Testament.
reasonably well considering it didn't really you
Yeah,
know, confirm or deny its subject. It just
yeah,
said, you know, which kind of left you hanging. You're like, that's what I always remember when I saw that. But anyway, this is about Jesus, but I was just kind of curious where the final, was there any that you were on the fence about where you said, oh, and then you said, I'll put it in
yeah,
because of such and such reason?
yeah. Um, Parable, which came out in 1964, and that was shown at the New York World's Fair.
Hmm.
That was a short film. Um, it sort of blurred the lines between theatrical and non-theatrical because the World's Fair people didn't pay admission to go into the pavilions to see it,
Hmm.
but it was on the big screen. And that film also, Billy Graham had a film called Man in the Fifth Dimension
Hmm.
that was also at the World's Fair. So those two are in the book because they are. It's first of all the idea that you go to a World's Fair and see a movie on Jesus is kind of interesting. That there are two rival films on the subject is even more. Man in the Fifth Dimension is a documentary, more of a film essay than a documentary, but it's a fascinating movie, and you can actually find it online on YouTube and the Billy Graham Ministries website. Parable as well, I believe, is online if you look for it.
Okay.
I also make just a passing mention of Godard's Hail Mary, which is, again, a nativity related film, which is not supposed to be in the book. The only reason it's mentioned, and it's mentioned in passing, is because the Pope came out against it. And this
Oh.
was at a time in the 80s when they were started to have criticism of movies that were considered controversial, like Life of Brian and
Mhm.
Last Temptation of Christ. I did not write about films where the central character believes they're Jesus.
Mhm.
Films like Ordette or Jesus of Montreal, they're wonderful films, but
Mhm.
it's not the focus of my book. This is another interesting topic, but not the topic I was going after. So you won't find them in the book.
Right. Well, ones that kind of blur the line, but it is still arguably the story of Jesus is like Godspell because it's
Yes,
kind of like a group of hippies, kind of putting on a show, as it were, in a certain respect. And it started off as a musical play on the stage, and if I remember correctly, this is the Toronto version that launched the careers of like everybody that ended up on Saturday Night Live and SCTV, pretty much. So I saw that was in there, and you said that Victor Garber was like one of the tallest Jesuses out
yes.
there. I didn't know we
With
knew.
an afro, yes, yeah.
I didn't know we knew how tall Jesus was, but anyway, um, so I can see why you put that one in there. So, are there any more? You said the ones you just said where people believe that they are Jesus or something. Any more that kind of blur the line like that didn't make the cut, or that?
No, that was about it. I mean, Godspell was actually one of three musicals that came out in 1973 about the life of Jesus. Jesus Christ Superstar was the second, and Johnny Cash had a film called The Gospel Road, which was also more of a film essay. It not a documentary. They obviously had reenactments of Christ's life. June Carter Cash played Mary Magdalene, which was kind of interesting. Though she got to sing the song "Follow Me," the John Denver song,
Mhm.
in the movie, and it was a very nice rendition.
Mhm.
Cash's film is idiosyncratic, but it's sincere and
Mhm.
has a wonderful country gospel score going for it. It was my favorite of the three of those musicals that came out.
Speaking of favorites, that was my next question, actually. And uh, do you have a favorite Jesus film of all the ones that you've wrote about?
Well, I would say, and it may not be a popular opinion among a lot of film critics, but it would be The Greatest Story Ever Told, the George Stevens
Hmm.
film. because a lot of people feel it's overlong and it's plotting, and uh, all of the star cameos sort of are distracting. It's sort of like it's a mad, 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 mad world in ancient Judea. So, and but I found the film to be beautifully photographed, beautiful production design. I liked Max von Sydow's performance.
Mhm.
It's probably the most accurate to the Gospels compared to many of the films, which often take rather severe liberties
Yeah,
with the story. So in that sense, it's this is the one that if it's ever on television, I find myself watching it,
yeah.
uh, even though I've seen it so many times. It never bores me.
Even though it was shot in like Utah, Arizona, and Nevada, and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and looks
Well,
it unfortunately.
well, that's a bit weird because I mean, some of the backgrounds obviously are not the Middle East. There's Jesus walking past snow-capped mountains.
Yeah,
All right, it's artistic license, but it's not artistic liberty. It's not that uh, the way that King of Kings, the both the DeMille and the Nicholas Ray versions completely rewrote so
mhm,
many aspects of the story that they become comedies really instead of religious dramas.
true. I mean, I do like the greatest story ever told, but yeah, it is a fine line. Is like, is this, do I like it because it's pretty good, or do I like it because it's kind of like you said, Mad Mad World or Around the World in 80 Days? How many cameos can you find in this film? So, you know, I enjoy different Jesus films. Of course, you mentioned why you don't cover this one, but you know, I do have to mention it is my favorite probably of a straight Jesus film is probably Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth. But since it was made for television,
It's a TV, yeah.
it couldn't be
So,
included. Yeah, unfortunately, I was kind of hoping maybe it had a limited release somewhere, you know. But
uh,
anyway, you know.
sorry.
um Going back to Greatest Story Ever Told, I know that there is like different lengths, and even the version currently about out on home video, I don't think is the full length version. Does that version still exist anymore, or is it kind of lost to time?
As far as I know, if the original director's cut exists, it's not anywhere to be seen. I know United Artists had a policy of throwing out footage that was jettisoned from films. Actually, it's a Mad, 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 Mad World had the same problem. There was
Yeah,
the original roadshow version, and then the general release was much shorter, but the roadshow version wasn't preserved, and it spent people had spent years trying to track down the missing footage. So that's the same situation with the
yeah.
story as told.
Yeah, and I think even now, even with the Blu-ray version, there's like still like about 5 minutes missing in Mad Men World after all this time.
Yeah.
But you know, that's a whole nother story for another different time. Um, Now, you've already kind of answered this, but I'll ask you again. Have you seen all that you've discussed? I mean, of the ones that still exist, I'll rephrase it. Did you sit through every film, or did you just kind of scan through it and get a gist of Jesus's performance, or what were you looking for?
I try to see every film that is available. Uh, some films that came out of Latin America and the Middle East and Asia, I've not been able to track down, but I basically did as much research as I could to describe the film and get a consensus from those who had seen it as to what the contents were. Uh, I tried to watch the films from start to finish. Some of the films were somewhat unwatchable, to be honest, but not both quality control and also language, because there are versions of these films that are online but not subtitled. So I could piece out what the story is supposed to be based on who's on screen and their image and how they correspond to sacred art. But those were a bit difficult to sit through. Mostly were fast forwarded, so I had an idea of what the production looked like, the style of the acting and the directing. But to be honest, I couldn't really sit through 2.5 hours of footage where I have no clue what anybody's saying.
Right. Now, you mentioned on the greatest story you ever told that one, apart from what I said about where it's shot, was probably the most authentic to the actual Gospels in the Bible. Um, are there any others that are more accurate or just as accurate, or conversely so far off the mark? I mean, barring like Godspell or something like that, but
Yeah,
what
well,
have you observed? I said overall, yeah.
well, Pasolini's Gospel according to St. Matthew.
Okay.
So that would be an obvious choice. There was the Canadian film, The Gospel of John, which came
Mhm.
out in 2013,
Mhm.
which was taken from the Gospel of John. So there's that. In terms of just going crazy, I mean, something like Nicholas Ray's King of Kings invents a character who is a centurion, who somehow is always there wherever Jesus is, from his childhood through the arrest of John the Baptist, through trial in front of Pilate. And it's like, why do we need this person? He's not in the gospel. It doesn't make sense. Day of Triumph, which was the first film, actually from the 1950s. It's an independent film that had a walking, talking Jesus in color. Actually, Jesus was more of a supporting character. They brought in Lee J. Cobb playing a zealot who tells the story of Jesus in flashback, and his character is nowhere to be found in the gospel. I guess because they didn't know what to do with Lee J. Cobb, they were able to get him. So let's turn him into a zealot. It was a bizarre viewing experience.
Mhm.
I mean, there are films that obviously use the Jesus character in ridiculous ways. There was a short film called Jesus and Hutch, which is a takeoff of the old 1970s cop shows with Eric Stoltz as a gun-toting Jesus who gives, when he catches the criminals, he gives them a very different idea of what turning the other cheek means. So it's just, I don't know. So it was why somebody thought it was a good idea. I think probably the worst film that I've seen of the bunch was something called The Divine Mr. J, which was an underground movie made in 1971 in Detroit, of all places. And the film probably would have been forgotten except for the fact that the Virgin Mary was played by an unknown singer actress named Bette Midler.
Mm.
And the title, The Divine Mr. J, was not the original working title, but after Bette became a big star
Right.
in 1974, the filmmakers were able to cobble some money together and they called it The Divine Mr. J and opened it in New York City, and Bette Midler promptly sued them. So, so that the film closed very quickly. It's online actually under its direct-to-video title called The Thorn. And if you search on YouTube for The Thorn, Bette Midler, you'll find it. You will not thank me for it, but it's there for those who want to see it.
And I think in the book you talk about it. This is like probably more obscure than those. Is like a couple pornographic films with Jesus, at least.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a notorious movie which is still lost, even though it was made in 1974, called Him,
Mm,
and that was an X-rated gay porn film.
mm.
And in the book, I'm happy to say that I have, the first time published, we have a picture from the movie,
I
because
saw
many
that.
years
Yeah.
all we knew about the film was the poster art that appeared in the Village Voice and some other underground newspapers. But somebody had sent me a picture of an actor who was billed as Tava playing Jesus, and Jesus is not wearing any clothing and holding his cross in front of, I think it's a hardware store in Lower Manhattan. So
Yeah.
yeah, so if you're curious what Him looked like, I can give you a clue as to what it looked like, not why it looked that way, but it's that showbiz.
Strangely enough, I guess it's just because of all the weird films I've heard about over the years. I had heard of that film before, and but like everyone else, had never seen it. I didn't know if I wanted to see it, but it's like I didn't know it was that hard to see. I thought it was just
Yeah.
like any other 70s porn film like Deep Throat. It was around, you just have to find it, but I guess not.
No, because Deep Throat was very popular. It was
Yeah.
a mainstream porn film. This was a gay porn film, so it had a very limited release.
Mhm.
If there were two prints, there were probably a lot. And the film, it's funny because the film's considered lost. Uh, some years back, I did an article for Film Threat about what I had considered the most sought after lost films of all time.
Mhm.
And I included him in that.
That's probably where I saw it. It's probably your article.
And what had happened afterwards, there was a huge controversy online. There was a group of movie archivists who said that I was stupid because this movie never existed. And the reason they said that is because most people learned of him from a book called The Golden Turkey Awards, written by the Medved
Okay, I
brothers.
remember that book too.
And
Yeah.
in the Golden Turkey Awards, there was one hoax movie planted by the Medveds. And people assumed that him was the hoax because who in the world would make a gay porn film about Jesus? Well, I knew it was not a hoax because when the book came out, the Medveds in the book invited readers to contact them with their ideas as to which film was the hoax in the book. This was 1979, so obviously no internet. You had to write a letter to them, which I did. And they responded very promptly, very polite. And they said, they told me what the hoax film was. I assumed it was another film that they cited, but no, the hoax film was something called Dog of Norway, which never existed. But him did exist. And then a website which is no longer around called Fishbowl New York, which covered the New York media industry, covered this controversy with myself and the film archivists. And then Andrew Sullivan, if you're familiar with him, the political commentator who's openly gay, read about this, and he's not a fan of Michael Medved. And so he issued a public challenge to Michael Medved saying, where did you see him? Did you actually sit in the gay movie house watching this movie? And Michael never responded to him. So most likely he learned of it from a review, because back then in the 70s, people today might find this hard to believe, but porn films actually were reviewed in Variety and in the trade papers the way that mainstream films were. In fact, if you picked up your community or daily newspaper, I lived in New York City, so we had the Daily News and the New York Times, and you open the movie section, you'd see the Radio City Music Hall and the Rivoli, but you'd also see the Pussycat Cinema advertisements in there. And actually, for many years, Deep Throat was advertised in these newspapers. And yeah, it's funny. You don't imagine anything like that could ever have happened, but that was the 70s. It was a lot more fun then.
Now, in the California newspapers, just for a comparison, I mean, I remember the ads were very explicit for the paper. And then in the 80s, they started getting a little bit more discreet, like cleavages weren't shown as much. They started drawing little lacy things to cover up, things like that, or, cropping the photos up. But they never did reviews. That's really amazing to me, is reviews of porno films. I don't know. Anyway, this is just out of left field, but I asked this when we did the Bigfoot, and I asked you, do you believe the thing about Bigfoot? So I'll just ask it again. Do you believe in Jesus, or is this just a pet project for you?
No, I do believe in Jesus, and that's why I did the book, because for many years I wanted to become a minister, and I did not do the career. So this was my way of bringing common ground between my faith and what became my career, which was writing about movies. And it was, I could say it's something of a lifetime journey that's finally come to crossroads, which was probably long overdue.
Okay, very interesting. Is that how you got the different ministers to give their commentaries at the beginning, their forwards and
Yes.
prefaces and comments and narration and whatever?
There's one forward by Reverend Caleb Scott Evans at Holy Trinity Anglican Church in Plainville, Connecticut, which is where I go to. And there's a quick advance praise from Judah Thomas, who runs Thrive Church, also in Connecticut, who's a friend of mine. So that's how they got into the book.
Got it. Okay. All right. And then I happen to notice that I got in the book, but so I do appreciate it. See, I actually read it enough to see my own name. I wasn't even trying. It was like, and special thanks to Mark Arnold of Fun Ideas Podcast. And I was like, wow, hey, cool. Anyway, so what should somebody take away from this book? What are you trying to accomplish? I mean, obviously, you can say anything you want, but I mean, are you trying to convert anybody, or are you just trying to expose a side of films that usually is overlooked? What was your ultimate goal?
I want to show how filmmakers look at the subject, because we look at the life of Jesus in so many different ways. There's really no one definitive way to study the subject. And I found it fascinating just how it has evolved over the years, from the earlier films, which seemed like living tableaus come to life, almost like Renaissance paintings that move, uh, recordings of passion plays. And over the years, productions became more elaborate, then more intimate, more irreverent, uh, and back to a degree of reverence, and then something even more contemporary. I have a section in the book called The Bro Jesus, where we have more recent films where Jesus, he's the Son of Man, but he's also somebody you could go to the bar and have a beer with. So I was thinking of The Shack, for example, which is uh, a strange film. At least to me, it's a strange film where, well, most of the film is basically Sam Worthington looking around, looking like, what's going on here? But we have a Jesus wearing a plaid shirt and jeans, who's racing on the water with Sam Worthington. It's okay. They were not my cup of tea, but there are people out there who like it. Actually, a lot of people did. It was a very big hit film. But it's just showing how this evolved over the years, and whether you're religious, whether you're not religious, I think you could get something out of the book. If you're religious, you could see how the interpretation of the New Testament has evolved or perhaps devolved, depending on how you look at it over the years. And if you're not religious, it's just how filmmakers were able to deal with the issues that sometimes raise controversy, particularly charges of anti-Semitism, uh, the wide rewriting of the book to score political points and push an agenda.
Mhm.
And then going to the other extreme, of course, is just having so much fun, like Jesus and Hutch, that that Jesus becomes a punchline. So there's really something for everyone in the book. You could see it as a celebration of faith. You could see it as a celebration of filmmaking, or cultural history. So take your pick.
Right, very good. You mentioned a little bit earlier that Max von Sydow is probably your favorite Jesus, but we didn't really elaborate on that. So, care to elaborate a little bit more why you liked his performance particularly?
Uh, Physically, von Sydow looks like an Orthodox icon come to life.
Hmm.
Uh, he's tall, he's gaunt. Uh, he obviously is Swedish. He has an interesting accent that doesn't quite fit in with everybody else in the movie, and that's another drawback of the film, is that the accents are either New York or London. So uh, in ancient Judea, either you came from Leicester Square or the Grand Concourse, and then you have the way he was speaking. It was somewhat, it was a halting manner. There was an otherworldliness about him, which always moved me in a way. Other actors tried to bring a humanity to Jesus. Von Sydow, I think, tried to bring more of a divinity, which is not the easiest thing to do as an actor. I think he pulled it off. Uh, I was particularly moved in the crucifixion sequence at the end, when life finally exits from him. His eyes don't close, but you
Hmm.
realize that life has left his body. It's a remarkable uh, piece of dramatic work, and uh, I think it's one of his finest performances.
Hmm. Very good. Just as an aside, and I wanted to mention it earlier, but we got sidetracked, of course. My dad and well, my parents used to go to various films over the years, and they were raised in the church, as was I. They went to see King of Kings with Jeffrey Hunter when it first came out, and this my dad said this way back, for years, and it's just a funny line. He said that as my parents were exiting the theater, he overheard some other couple, somebody saying, it looked just like him. I'm like, oh, well, I guess, because, there is argument about how Jesus is supposed to look and how he really looked. And, we don't really actually know for sure, but he probably didn't look like Jeffrey Hunter. Who knows,
Who knows? But it's
But
funny because Jeffrey Hunter mentioned that he got a lot of bad reviews for the movie,
yeah,
but he also, over the years, had received a lot of fan mail from people who said they were deeply moved by his performance. So again, you look at something else on the screen, and there's no definitive way to dissect it. I mean, some people see camp, and
yeah,
some people see uh, passion and something that's emotionally moving. It's the
right,
same film, so
right.
it's all in the eye of the beholder.
Right. In the long run, I guess it's probably one of his three best known roles since he died so young is,
Yeah.
that Captain Christopher Pike in Star Trek and the Great Locomotive Chase for Disney. Those are the three movies I can think of that he did.
Oh,
What else? Am
the
I?
Searchers, Searchers.
Oh, okay. The Searchers. I forgot about that. That's right.
It's
Poor.
just one of the
Oh,
greatest movies
okay.
ever made. Yeah,
But unfortunately, he died young. But
yeah.
he did a few things. So he's kind of like a James Dean in a certain respect. He's known
Yeah.
for a few three projects for. Yeah.
And, the funny thing is that very few people ever point out that he and John Wayne, who co-starred in The Searchers, of course, were together in The Greatest Story Ever Told, because John Wayne
Right.
was Centurion, which is the Mad Mad World moment, of course, in the movie.
Right.
Where,
And a lot of
yeah,
people do make fun of that, but I
yeah.
don't know. I think it was kind of cool to have Wayne in the film. um, Barring all that, so we said Sidehouse seems to come off as best in your eyes. Who do you think of the films you've seen? Let's not go into him and all the other ones, but
Yeah.
worst Jesus performance that you've seen. I'll leave it to those.
All right. I don't know if it's the worst, but it's my least favorite.
Yeah.
And I guess some of the viewers will not like me for saying it, but Willem Dafoe in
Hmm.
Last Temptation of Christ. I couldn't stand the film. I couldn't stand him. The idea of this neurotic, weak, whiny Jesus to me was extremely unappealing,
Yeah.
and I had a lot of difficulty with his performance. It's not really his fault because it's the material he was given and the direction. I didn't think Scorsese was the right person to
Hmm.
do a Bible film. It's you start watching the movie and immediately there's Harvey Keitel with curly red hair, really, as Judas, slapping about Willem Dafoe's Jesus like they're the Judean forerunners of the Goodfellas cast. It's like what is going? It didn't make any sense at all. And so,
Yeah.
and of course, Defoe was sitting outside Mary Magdalene's bordello, which of course is obvious. Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. There's nothing in the Testament that said so. And it's just like, all right, it's going to be one of those films. And
Yeah.
to me, that was probably the most grueling film. I mean, there were incompetent movies like Divine Mr. J, but at least you're not expecting very much from an underground movie made in Detroit, but you're
Right.
expecting a little better from
Right.
Martin Scorsese.
Yeah. I tended to avoid it, and it wasn't because of what you said, because I heard about the controversy when the film came out.
Yeah.
And I do like most of Scorsese's films. There's a few other duds. I'm not one that's a Scorsese worshiper 100%. But my biggest qualm about it was just uh, the overall kind of approach, and I think that's what you were saying, and it had nothing to do with taking liberties with the story.
Yeah.
And so I only saw it the first time about a year ago, and when I was looking at it, it's unfortunately that I saw Amazing Spider-Man first, because I thought of him as the Green Goblin the whole time. So, such as watching a movie out of chronological order, but hey. um Let's see. So if you find that there's a number of films that you didn't uncover that somehow miraculously show up, or strangely enough, in the next decade or so, a number of new films featuring the life of Jesus come out, would there be a volume two, or an update at least of this book?
Yes, I said there would be. I was hoping there would be. I know that there's Terrence Malick's production, which is underway while we're speaking. There's supposed to be a documentary about Jesus and homosexuality, which is supposed to come out this year. If there are enough films coming out that warrant an updated version, I would do it, certainly.
Very good. Okay. All right. Well, I'm pretty much out of questions. Is there any other things you might need to say about it that I haven't brought up, or is that pretty
Yes,
much it?
yes.
Go ahead.
The book is called Jesus Christ Movie Star. It is published by Bear Manor Media. It will be available starting June 7. You can get it on Amazon and all the other e-commerce sites where they sell books, and also from bearmanamedia.com.
Very good. And if people want to get in touch with you, just say, "Hey, I have this movie in my basement." It doesn't have to be about Jesus, but it might be for your bootleg files or something else. How can they reach out to you and contact you?
Well, they can reach out to me through the online movie show, which is on SoundCloud, from Nutmeg Chatter, which is at nutmegchatter.com. I'm at Cinema Crazed, which is cinema-crazed.com. Or go to Facebook, go facebook.com/Phil Hall, and boom, it's me.
Very good. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Phil Hall, for being my guest again. We'll have you back every time you write a book. Or hey, if you just want to shoot the breeze about more gay, homosexual Jesus films, we can do it. So
Uh,
but it's always but it's always a pleasure talking with you and being on your
yeah,
show. I will say that.
I'll get back to you on that one, but I appreciate having me on the show. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll talk soon. And that's it for Fun Ideas Podcast. And today, again, my special guest was the writer, actor, performer, great all around podcast host, Phil Hall. And thank you very much.